So today we get to talk to Jeff Koser. Jeff is from Milwaukee area, which is really cool. I realized that when I got pitched, hey, you should talk to Jeff. And I'm like, yeah, I've been following Jeff's stuff for a long time. So he's the spirited CEO and founder of Selling to Zebras, a sales tools software company. Jeff's also an award-winning co-author of Selling to Zebras, How to Close 90% of the Business You Pursue Faster, More Easily, and More Profitably. Now, also really cool about this book is in 2010, there was a book published called The Sales Gurus, which was, lessons from all the best sales books of all times, and Selling to Zebras was featured there. So that was really cool. And when I got, when Jeff's team said, hey, you should talk to Jeff, I'm like, dude, I've been looking at Jeff for a long time, and absolutely we should talk. And even though we lived in the same city, we never connected until now. So Jeff, it's so good to see you, man. How's it going?
I'm doing great, Phil. I'm honored to actually finally meet you. I looked at your stuff online. I read about you, and like we talked about before, I was even practicing the Phil Gerbyshak smile in my reflection on my off monitor here, and I couldn't quite get it down.
Yeah, well, I've got a flip top head. I think my head just kind of comes apart and flips back, like the old toothbrushing commercials. So yeah,
Yes.
pretty fortunate, man. So Jeff, so in Milwaukee, right? So are you famous in Milwaukee? Does everybody, you walk around town and everybody knows who you are? You like Aaron Rodgers or what?
Yeah, no, not even here. In fact, I think that you have to be more than 50 miles from home to be an expert at anything. Even Jesus taught us that,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, absolutely, right? It took 1,600 years for him to get known in the Holy Land. So
that's about how long it'll take me too.
Yep. Yeah, me too, right? That's always the hope. So yeah, for sure, man. But your company and your book, it's called Selling to Zebras. This I've got to understand and really think about here. Selling to Zebras. Well, Jeff Koser, that's a Z, except it's not. It's an S. Zebras. Okay, so talk to me, Jeff. Why zebras, man?
So zebras. So I didn't even coin the phrase. How's that?
Of course.
Yeah. So the guy who did, his name is Kevin Calderwood, and he's just an exceptional leader, good friend. And we had started with a ERP company called BAN, BAAN, and nobody knew who we were. We didn't have any customers here, and I've laid down a track on that story so many times. But suffice it to say that when you're selling something that's critical for running your business and you don't have any references, you got to figure out where you ought to go or you're going to die, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We brainstormed for a day, and we built the profile of the perfect prospect. And Kevin took all those notes, all the whiteboard information, and that night he put it into a format. And when he came back the next morning, he said, here's the Bond Zebra. And we all said, what? Why would you call it that? And he said, well, if I took my 3-year-old to the zoo, he'd be able to point out a zebra. He'd know exactly what it was, and he'd never forget. And he said, that's how easy it should be and how clear it should be when we look at a good prospect. It should be like a zebra.
Wow.
That's where it came from.
That's really smart. So Seth Godin wrote a book about purple cows, but purple cows are remarkable because you've never seen one. But now that it's a zebra, right now it's familiar, but it's unique. And I think that's a good differentiator. So this whole zebra thing, I mean, now that you've moved from Bon into zebra, so you kind of went from B to Z, huh? With how that works instead of A to Z, right?
We did. In fact, you've said 2 phrases here I'm going to steal already.
Well, they're yours, man. So, because I think it's fascinating, right? I think it's fascinating how sometimes the obvious is so often overlooked, right? We need to know who our customer is or we're going to die. So talk to me about that. I mean, what are some of the characteristics that we need in order to find our perfect zebra, our best customer, the person that we can serve the best and do the most for?
So over time, we distilled it down into the 7 things that make up every deal. It goes from company to operations to power. Then it's funding, value, technology, and service. And everything about a deal can be distilled down into that. And trust me, it just is. So why 7? Well, there are 7 dwarfs, right? There's 7 days to the week. On the seventh day, God rested. There's 7 steps to enlightenment in Buddhism if you want to stay religion neutral. No, but those are irrelevant, right?
But they're interesting. I was going with you there. I'm like, okay, magic number 7. I'm writing this down.
It's the most chosen favorite number. Yeah, no. But that's how we did it. And then we started measuring and we started scoring. And you score each one of those attributes from 0 to 4, and it turns colors. So it goes from red, yellow to green. So at each stage and each step of a deal and each characteristic of a deal, you can see if you're weak or strong, right? And then the total score means something. So the total score adds up into something that's either red, yellow, or green. And you haven't earned the right to ask for the business till it's green. So it's really easy. It's really visual. And you can teach new sellers or even old dogs that you don't want to ask for the business till you've put yourself in a position where you ought to be asking for it.
That's really smart. I like that. That you don't ask till it's green. You have to earn the right for the business to ask for the business. So is it 4 steps that you have to get through, Jeff, or is it a certain percentage? Or tell me a little bit about that math there.
So the scoring goes from 0 to 16, and then it stays red. So if you get 7 attributes, the highest score you can have is 4 times 7, 28, right? Pretty simple math.
Yep.
But what we learned over time is that if you're from 0 to 16, you're still in the red. And after you meet with power, and power could be a group, it's the decision-making authority. After you meet with power, if it's still red, we say you should move on to another prospect. But after you meet with power, it should be in the yellow, and then you can take a look at which attributes are still red, which ones are still yellow, and then you strategize on how to close those. So from 17 to 22, it's in the yellow. And what's interesting is those deals will end in non-decision that quarter. And those are the deals that kill all businesses, because it's not the red ones. We all walk away from those, right? But it's the ones that we lull ourselves into thinking we could eventually close, and those stay yellow. And then the green ones, those we call them zebras, because we're going to close 90% of those. And it's uncanny. Our customers close 90% of what turns green. But now the trick is, how do you get enough to turn green? And that's the next piece of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So 90% of those that you've earned the right to ask for the business of, you should win the business of. So why do we spend so much time on those crazy yellow ones, Jeff? What's the allure of that?
So it's usually because we don't have enough in our pipeline, right? So we don't want to clean it out, because then if it looks terrible, and we've all gone into a review meeting, or whether that's a seller with their sales manager, or the sales manager going to the management team, or even the CEO going to the board. We've all gone into those meetings where the pipeline is shrinking, or the closer we get to the end of the quarter, the smaller it gets, right? And those are crummy feeling meetings. You get a feeling in the pit of your stomach, so you leave some stuff in there that just doesn't belong. So that's why we do it, and we think the cure is focusing on zebras all the time, not wasting any time someplace else, and building a business case around why, and that's the next phase of this, is building a business case and telling a story with that business case.
Interesting. So telling a story, that sounds like marketing to me, Jeff. Is that really a salesperson's job, is to tell a story?
So it's really both, right? So sales and marketing classically aren't aligned, but with all the software today and all the technology going in that direction, sales and marketing are becoming more and more aligned, right? And if you have software that helps you tell that story, now you've got a way for sales and marketing to come together on how to do that. And that's kind of what we do. We bring everybody together with a common go-to-market, not just sales and marketing, but literally finance and the client success, or the delivery team, and even R&D. They all weigh in, for example, on what a perfect prospect or a zebra looks like.
That makes really good sense. Yeah, that alignment, we talk about that at Vengresso a lot, because that's often the missing piece. And it's to your point, sales and marketing, sometimes that's easier to get in alignment than it is to get the rest of the organization. And we forget sometimes that we also need to get those customer service folks in line. right? Because if they're chasing away our zebras, if they're ticking them off with bad service, they're costing us zebras that we should be closing. Have you seen that as well?
No question. When you get the customer service people involved in building out the zebra attributes, and they get to weigh in on what a really good customer looks like to them from their experience, that perspective is very valuable, because today's world is a SaaS world, right? Whether you sell software as a service or you sell whatever it is you sell, companies don't want to make that big commitment. They want to test you out. They want to do it over time. They want to grow it over time. So you have to deliver exceptionally well, or the competition will do that and take that business. And so the customer service perspective, being able to make sure that they achieve the value, solve the business problem that they intended to, is critical to getting that renewal of the business or growing the business.
Yeah, and also, that leads to kind of the next logical point is, once you've kind of bagged this zebra, once you've delivered them great service and you're consistent in that, now you've earned the right to ask for a referral to other zebras. Is that part of the process as well, Jeff?
It absolutely is, Phil. So we have part of it called voice of the customer, and voice of the customer comes into play at two different times. So after you build the zebra with the team, the cross-functional team, you go test it out with the customer. So you talk with Power, what business problem was solved by buying this solution, and what value was created. And your goal is to get quantifiable measures. And we teach this. We have free materials. We have a free How Do You Build Your Zebra book out on our website. We have a free Voice of the Customer book out on the website. It's kind of involved as to how you get some of this information. So it's an ebook that's about 19 pages, which isn't too bad for an ebook. But there's a lot of words, maybe not enough pictures. But that's what validates what the management team said was the zebra. And then when you're done, you deliver a proposal, and you actually help make sure that all the promises that were made, that got told and were made, and commitments that were made during the sales cycle. So Power, you're going to commit to them. Power's going to commit to the business, what's going to accomplish. You're not done till you accomplish that. But then when you do, you circle back and you do another voice of the customer. You document that, and the loop closes, and you can continue the cycle. It becomes very repetitive, very nice, very refreshing. It's fun.
Fun sales. Boy, that sounds like something we all need more of, Jeff, for sure. Because a lot of times it's work, right? I mean, there's a lot of steps there. So, I'm setting you up here, but there's got to be software, right, that makes this work a little better for us. So that's kind of what you guys do, right? Is not only do you have the process, but then you have software that helps us implement this and helps us document it, so it isn't as complicated as we talked about, right?
That's exactly right, and it's simple to use. In fact, I could sit you down, and most people can do it without any training, even, because it's the third version of our software. The first one failed. The second one was really hard to use. So this one is so easy. We kind of designed it after the thinking of the iPhone, right? Nobody opens up a manual to figure out how to use an iPhone. But what it does is it guides a seller, and you actually present from the software platform. So it creates a presentation for you, which you tailor to that zebra. It gets you to work through why they're your zebra. So they agree on it. They actually score it with you. You agree on the next step, the date of that next step. You even talk about the size of the opportunity, the date that maybe it would close if it worked well for them. So what you're really gathering is all the information that you need to make a CRM up to date. And then it is either is your CRM, or if you're a larger company and you have Salesforce or Dynamics or NetSuite or any of the big platforms for CRM, it integrates with those, so that you don't have to enter that information again, which is what salespeople hate about CRM, right?
Yeah, that repetitive entry is killer, because it's like, come on, I already did this. I completed this step. Leave me alone and stop begging me for more. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's really important, not just for sales management, but also for sellers in general. I mean, how does this benefit a salesperson?
So if you sell from the platform, you are collaboratively working with a prospect. You're agreeing on the quantification of the value. So you're building that business case with them. You're getting agreement that they have the business problem that you solve, and that you found evidence of that, and that you know from your voice of the customer work how much value is created by solving it. And if you can't verify that, or if you're talking with someone that doesn't own that problem, you're really not going to be successful as a seller, and you're not going to be successful in our software, and that becomes glaringly obvious to everyone. Plus, when you're done, like we talked about, all of us that have been in sales, you get done at the end of the day, and let's say at 6 o'clock, you're done with, you had a great day, maybe even, met a prospect that you know is really right for your solution. But tomorrow you've got a business review, and you're not ready. Your deals aren't up to date in the CRM, the dates, the dollars, the next steps, the presentations that you made to them. It doesn't matter what level of sales you are. It doesn't matter if you're the person that is on the street, or if you're the CEO presenting to the board. If you're not ready, you're not ready. That night you got to go do all that. Well, we take all that away. We integrate and you sell with the platform, so it gets up to date, and sellers love that. It like eliminates the thing about CRM that doesn't actually help them sell.
That's interesting. So so talk through that a little more. I think that's really interesting. It's got all those steps. So so the story is in there, the dates are in there, the dollars are in there. I mean, is there room for the collateral, or how does that work?
Yeah, but the difference is, Phil, the collateral is actually attached where it makes sense. So if you say, here's a business problem we solve, here's the evidence I found you have it, and if you're the right person that cares about this, if this is what should be keeping you up at night, I never ask what keeps you up at night. I hate that question, because buyers expect that you know them well enough to know what should be keeping them up at night today, right? So if you confirm that they're in fact the executive that cares about solving that problem, and you have proof that you've done it before, that's where you put the collateral, right there. Now you can click it open. If that's a voice of the customer case study, you show them, here's what our customer said about our ability to solve that problem. If it's another piece of marketing material that greatly links to how you create value, it's right there, right at their disposal, so they don't have to go find it. It's in the right logical place. And that allows you to train salespeople faster. It allows you to create consistency in the way that they tell the story and solve the problem, and it creates credibility with the person that they're working with, because it's all right there. It's not the salesperson saying something. That's what's powerful about voice of the customer, right? It's your customers saying, you did this for me, and this is what the value you created.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense, right? Put the testimonial, put the case study, put the proof right at the point of the decision, which is, that's kind of website 101 too, right? And we don't do that. So what advice do you have, though, for, let's say you have a new organization, Jeff? If you just spun up a new organization and maybe you don't have those case studies and those happy customers yet to share that proof with, how do you overcome that with selling to zebras?
So that's a really good question. So the way we did that at Bond, and the way we've taught it since, is that even if you don't have customers, you can still build a zebra, because it's who you intend to work with. It's the problem you believe you solve uniquely well. So you put that stake in the sand, and then you go test it. And you may be right, you may be wrong, and you might have to pivot. But you at least think through that, so that you're not a product chasing a problem. You've identified the problem you are creating a solution around, and that's what you go call on are people that you find evidence that they actually have that problem. It creates more credibility, creates a better ability to penetrate, creates a better penetration message, and then you prove it over time. But guaranteed, you'll have to pivot, right? Because I love what the book what is it called? It's on my shelf. I'm looking over there and I'm not seeing it, but it's the Startup Owner's Manual. You've probably heard of that one.
Yep.
There's a quote there that says, "No product ever withstood its first encounter with a customer." And that's true, right? So you have to make it better or you have to pivot.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So yeah, so proving it out and understanding, how your solution solves the problem is really a great step. And to your point, be willing to pivot, be willing to move, be willing to say, well, that didn't work, and maybe we didn't get far enough along in the process to actually earn the right to make that sale. And that's really hard. So for a sales manager who's listening in and saying, I'm wondering, is this something that I can get behind and that I can sell up to the executive when, I've got to make my quarter end numbers, Jeff? How do I make that sale up?
Well, I tell you how it works exceedingly well when you are the manager and you can go into management and you can say, look, I've got a way that can predict with 90% accuracy what my team and I are going to close. I can tell you at the beginning of the quarter, you're going to close 90% of the green. But the other thing we didn't talk about is you'll close 50% of the yellow. And that's because you'll be able to move 50% of those yellow into the green early enough in the quarter to close them. So what's really happening is you're really able to predict how good a quarter you're going to have at the beginning. And now gee, if I've got a gap already at the beginning of the quarter, I'm going to have to do something different. So you can honestly look at where you're at. You can predict it. And if you're a young company, you can actually hire to that forecast because you're going to achieve that. And hiring to a forecast is important when you're a young company because as you're growing, you need those people generally before you can afford them, right? So now you've got an ability. That's what we did at Bond. Also, we were constantly hiring ahead of our ability to pay for those people. So we had to get good at forecasting and know where we were going to be. And even in ERP, which is hard to predict, because it's a big ticket item, it's a big decision. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of decision makers, and we closed better than 90% of what was in our forecast. And when I left Bond, Phil, we had 6,000 people 5 years later, and we were just shy of 800 million in annual revenues. So, and everybody there knew what a Bond Zebra was, and everybody knew how to sell this way.
Wow. That is awesome. So as we kind of move a little bit further down here towards completion, so talk to me now, Jeff, about some of the surprises that happen if you start implementing this, because I think, all the hard stuff that you mentioned, you close more business, obviously that's critical to sales, but sometimes it's those tangential benefits that really help us. So are there any surprises that come as a result of selling to zebras?
Sure, there's some surprises. So one thing is everyone in the organization that participated in building the zebra starts to ask questions about prospects, such as, tell me why that's a zebra. Emphasis on that when they don't think it is, right? The other thing that happens is that sellers will invariably still start to call on, or will try to call on, lower level individuals to start the sales cycle that they called on before. And if you bring a business case to someone that either doesn't care or doesn't understand a business case, you'll actually make them even a little bit more uncomfortable. So it's really designed to have an initial conversation with the source of power, just to confirm they have that problem, just to confirm that if you solved it, there would be value, and it's either a high enough priority or it could become a high enough priority for both of you to put energy into working through solving that problem. So that's a bit of, sellers will almost always go back to the level that they're most comfortable with. So that's where you have to upscale them a little bit. You have to increase their business acumen just a little bit, and when you do that, they become proficient at this, and it's easier than you think because it's guided. The software guides them through it, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting for them.
That's excellent. Those are good. Those are good benefits, and getting in front of your forecast also fantastic benefits. Something that we all hope to do. If we can outkick our coverage and get ahead of that, we can be a lot better off. So, Jeff, how do you stay sharp, man? Let's talk about, you mentioned you're looking over at your bookshelf there. What are you learning as a sales leader? How do you stay sharp and stay on top of your game?
So I read and I listen to podcasts and when I was looking at your materials, deal storming, I'm going to go get that book, and I've never heard of Today We Are Rich, which reminds me of Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill's book, right? So I'll go get those and I'll read those. And another book that I read recently is a book called The Hero Method. It's by Catherine Gillette, and it's really based on that all good movies, even all good books, actually follow the hero method, where you have a problem. There's a void, as she calls it. So that's the problem. You usually have an unwilling hero, which is the person looking for, how do I solve this problem? How do I fill this void? So think of Luke Skywalker, right? I mean, he's an unwilling hero, right? He gets pulled into this thing because his planet gets blown up. So there's a big void.
Yeah.
And then there's usually a guru that helps you, right? It's Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, the way that you approach this, you have to approach it like a guru, which softly pushing, softly prodding, softly bringing knowledge and materials and creating credibility. And then you make the seeker the hero. You're not the hero. The seeker is the hero. Your solution is the treasure, but you are not the hero. And that's a subtle shift that makes it all feel a little bit better. And then there's mastery, and then there's the healed land, which is really you make the world a better place as a result of going through this process together. And when I read her book, the irony of it is that's about storytelling, right? It's about good storytelling. And the way we wrote Selling the Book, Zebras, without even knowing any of this, follows that exact same process. And I had to laugh, because Kurt, the hero of the book, he kind of stumbles through it. He finds a guru and obviously solves all the world's problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, if you bag enough zebras, right, the world is better for it. We eat better and we live better and we sell better. So that's good. That's good. So what podcast? You mentioned podcasts, though. I want to dig just a little deeper in that here. What podcasts are you listening to? You mentioned that you're going to pick up Tim Sanders' 2 books, which is great. I'm a big fan of Tim. His Love is the Killer App book really changed my life a long time ago. And those 2 books that you mentioned are terrific as well. But what podcast do you listen to, and how do you listen to them?
So the Salesman podcast is one. I look at the titles of what it is to see if I think it's something unique, like the humor one, that you did with Tim Gard is one that I listen to. He's a funny guy. You're a funny guy. I have to work at being funny, and I'm playful but not funny, and he's downright funny, and so I picked up an idea or 2 from that. Like the red eye. I might bring a red eye on the next red eye I take.
Totally. Yeah. And he really does travel with rubber chickens, by the way. So, which is really funny. He's got the legs are sticking out of his luggage. So it's pretty cool.
So that's what I look for. And books. So when we do voice of the customer work, if I'm going to talk to a customer that's in an industry that I don't understand, I'll either read white papers or I'll go get a book and I'll study that a little bit so that you earn the right to ask some deeper questions because you know something about their business. And that usually impresses them to no end. And you can then get information that they wouldn't have divulged before.
Yeah. Relating to your customer is a really important thing.
Yeah. And that's what I love about what we do. I get to learn about a lot of different businesses, social media, like you guys, like Vengresso is in, Facebook is taken over the world, even as it relates to B2B, right? So there's just a ton to learn there. And we have a client that their software tracks all the YouTube videos, and it makes sense out of what's trending, or not just YouTube, all the video, I should say. It makes sense of what's trending, who's trending, who they could link business to business wise, what content expert, what author, what actor. It's pretty intriguing stuff, and I didn't know anything about that side of the business. So you get to learn those things and almost literally talk a different language than you knew before.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Really, really good stuff. So sounds like you're definitely committed to lifelong learning, which is something I admire and something I try my best to stay up on as well. So as we wrap up here, Jeff, what is one more thing that salespeople can do in order to bag more zebras, close more business, and just be better as a sales professional?
So if you go through the process of building your zebra, it will make you better just by doing that process, because you will critically look at every prospect you pursue after that with just a little bit different lens. And it will make you better because as you focus and as you hone in on with that focus, you're going to be better prepared for every call you make. You're going to know what to look for in that prospect. You're going to know when you find it, and you're going to know when you don't. And then after that, it's just the discipline of walking away and saying no. The power of saying no in business is very powerful. Most businesses don't fail because they have a lack of ideas. Most of them focus because they have too many ideas, and they're scattered and they don't focus. It's true with sellers also.
Yeah, for sure. So folks, so you're listening here, I want you to think about what Jeff just said, and that is be willing to say no. Be willing to walk away from those that are antelope and focus on your zebras. Take it from A to Z, sell to some zebras, learn from Jeff. His book is called Selling the Zebras. His software, it's all about selling the zebras. And guess what? If you go looking for zebras like Jeff Koser, you're going to find them. And you're going to make more money. So, Jeff, how can folks get connected more with you if they want to learn more of your zebra awesomeness?
Sellingtozebras.com. We're really easy to find. I'm easy to find.
Awesome. So, folks, go check out sellingtozebras.com. Listen to Jeff Koser. He's got great stuff for you. He's got a free ebook on his website all about building your zebra so you can also close 90% of your zebras, learn about the voice of the customer, and learn from someone who is always learning. Jeff, it was a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Phil. It was fun for me too.
Awesome.
Great job.
Thanks.